Deck building in Library of Ruina can be a tedious and daunting task for those uninitiated. There are so many strategies and optimizations that it can be tough to figure out what to put into a deck or what passives suit it best. Tons of strategies exist like Smoke, Hardcore Defense, Singular Strike, Burn Overload, but no strategy seems to be as difficult to build around than Charge. Charge is a status effect that only serves as a currency in most cases. Under normal circumstances, you gain charge using certain pages and then spend it to boost other ones. This boost can range from card draw to light restoration to simply boosting the power of the page. The first reception that introduces charge as a mechanic is the reception of the Warp Cleanup Crew on the second tier of Urban Nightmare. Every single combat page from this encounter has something to do with charge, whether it be to gain it or spend it. We can divide the combat pages into two groups, Charge Gain and Charge Spend. We can further divide Charge Gain into two groups as well, useful and, well, not useful. There are 4 combat pages that fall into the Charge Gain category in ascending order of Charge Gain: Energy Cycle, Rewind, Dimensional Rift, and Overcharge. Of these, the useful ones are Energy Cycle and Dimensional Rift, while Rewind is okay and Overcharge does not outweigh the negatives overall. When it comes to charge generation, it's important to know that there is a sweet spot to how much you can gain. With only 2 exceptions, you will always want your charge to gain to occur in multiples of 3. In the case of the Warp Cleanup Crew, every source of spending charge costs exactly 3. Energy Cycle gives 3 charge, while Dimensional Rift gains 6, thus giving 1 and 2 uses of charge-based effects at this point in the game. There are other benefits to using these 2 attacks specifically as well. Energy Cycle gives 1 light if the first offensive die connects, and Dimensional Rift has 2 slash dice, making it easier to work in slash power decks. Rewind used to be absolute garbage since it overgenerated the sweet spot by 1 charge. However, now that basically every card has been buffed, it is an okay option for the 2 pages that require 4 charge to trigger the effects. Unfortunately, it doesn't become useful until the next charge reception, since none of those pages are unlocked until then. One thing to note is that Rewind and Dimensional Rift can be used together to generate 10 charge on the first scene. Overcharge is the most powerful unboosted attack in the game, even now. However, it's pretty obvious why it isn't usable. While the attack is powerful and the 10 instant charge may seem appealing, max out your charge while doing massive damage. You won't be able to act the next scene. In a game like this, not being able to act a turn is basically a death sentence. And while Lesty, one of the key pages obtained from the fight, gains 1 strength and endurance after not attacking, it isn't a big enough bonus to be worth selecting. When it comes to charge spending, there are 3 options that emerge from this fight: Leap, Ripple, and Rip Space. Starting at the lowest cost here, we'll look at Leap. Leap is a 1 light combat page that grants 1 haste on use no matter what, which actually pairs well with Rose's unique passive as well as another we'll talk about much later. The key to this page is spending 3 charge to draw 2 more pages instantly, regardless of how the attack turns out. It is an option to preserve your momentum in a fight. By spending charge here, you ensure you'll be able to act multiple times in the next scene, theoretically. This is still one of my favorite momentum options in charge decks, even though we are 3 tiers into Star of the City. Next up is Ripple, a hyper-offensive option that doesn't seem that great when compared to something like Forceful Gesture, which has a draw and weakening potential. Ripple leads with a weaker evade die than even Rewind, but it actually has a purpose in this case. Losing a clash with it boosts the power of the Sol offensive die on the page by +2. On top of that, spending 3 charge on use boosts the power of both dice on the page by +3. When executed correctly, this boosts the actually decently powerful 517 roll of the Soul attack die to a whopping 1022, which is high even now. Oh, and landing the attack inflicts 2 bind, further helping speed-based builds. Last, we have Rip Space. This is the first exclusive attack we'll be looking at, and every single charge-based key page has one of these. In this case, only Rose, Sen, and Lesty can use this attack. It spends all charge the character currently has. Each charge contributes to 9.9% chance of succeeding. If you win, all dice on the page receive +8 power, which is a lot, while if you lose, you gain no boost and immediately take 20 damage. On top of a successful roll, if you spend at least 10 charge, the 3 to 6 slash die that the attack ends with gains an additional +2 power. The attack turns from a 2-4-3-6 to a staggering 10-12-13-16. The first die on the page also draws 2 pages and a clash win for increased momentum. Needless to say, you will be building your deck around this attack. For this point in the game, going straight charge is questionable at best. Make sure whatever page you're using has 2 dice. If you use Sen or Lesty, you will need to attribute the speed passive onto them. A simple deck setup for Rose would be the following: 3x Energy Cycle for easy charge and light regen, 1 copy of Leap for momentum, 2 copies of Dimensional Rift for high charge gain, 1 copy of Rip Space, obviously, and 2 copies of Ripple for a high damage attack with the ability to slow target. A simple rule for building charge decks is to have 2 or 3 of a 0-cost charge gain and 2 of a higher cost charge gain. Then have 1 page that costs very little to spend charge and 1 that costs higher. Lastly, run the exclusive page of whatever key page you're using. It should be noted that none of the Warp Cleanup Crew pages have anything to do with charge in their passives aside from their abilities to use Rip Space. The second reception to introduce charge mechanics is the reception of Kane Office. Whereas the Warp team was much more offensive, Kane takes a more defensive approach to using charge. You're going to notice a lot of defensive dice here, and likely remember how Rewind is not recommended. The difference here is that the lead die is almost always a block die, which is more consistent overall. Starting with charge gain once again, we'll first look at Energy Shield. This is a 1-cost high defense option that gives 3 charge and an additional 1 if the first defensive die loses a clash. The first die is made intentionally weak as a result. This provides the same charge gain as Rewind in almost any situation. Next up, we have Absorb Impact, which is not as damage dealing as Dimensional Rift, but the lead block roll is very strong for this point in the game, 7 to 9. It also provides the same 6 charge as Dimensional Rift, and is better than Dimensional Rift in every way since the offensive die is still Slash. Lastly, we have a Golden Opportunity, which is the less useful charge gain for this encounter. It gains 5 charge immediately, and an additional 2 for each time the lead evade die wins a clash. 2 to 9 is the same roll as Rewind for 1 more light, but it is still less reliable than a block die. Unlike Rewind, this page actually has some use on Venus Floor thanks to an abnormality page that specifically boosts evade die. Technically, this page has the highest potential charge gain out of any, but the average is 7 and the realistic maximum is 9. You are also likely to take unnecessary damage in return for only 1 more charge. When it comes to spending charge, there are only 2 options this time around. The first one is Energy Conversion, the first exception to the 3 charge rule. It costs 4 charge to restore 3 light, which is the highest light regeneration in the game currently. Plus, even without spending charge, the first die on the page will draw another page if it connects. It does very slightly less damage than Leap, but the reason it isn't as reliable is because even if you have full light, it will waste your charge when you use it. It may be better to only use 1 of these pages for emergency situations. Secondly, we have Ready Up, which has surprisingly high dice rolls for what it does. For 2 charge, it will grant 1 protection to all allies for the remainder of this scene as well as the entire next scene. It is also a solid defensive option on its own without this protection buff. Ready Up is one of the best ways to stack protection in the game if 2 to 3 members of your team are using it, greatly reducing the damage you take. We'll go over the key pages of Kane Office next. All of the key pages have 2 passives in common: Energy Discharge and Charge Shield. These are made to correspond with charge gain and spending. While at emotion level 2 or higher, Energy Discharge will grant 1 strength the following scene if the user spent charge using combat pages. Charge Shield does the same thing, except it grants endurance when gaining charge. The combination of these 2 is a boon for any charge deck. The first key page is Bada this time around. His unique passive is Force Field, which grants 1 protection on the following scene if you spent charge using a combat page this scene. This synergizes very well with Ready Up for stacking protection. Bada's unique combat page is Devastating Thrash. This attack has 3 offensive dice in ascending power and is the other exception to the 3 charge rule. For 4 charge, you can increase the power of all dice on the page by +2, creating an attack that is one of the very few to beat out Wrath of Torment in power. Unlike with Energy Conversion, there is no downside to accidentally spending charge on this attack. The next key page is Martina, who doesn't have a unique charge-based ability. Her exclusive combat page is called Uncanny Strike, which leads with a surprisingly strong 7 to 13 pierce attack. Plus, you get an additional block die after, likely to prevent singular strike boosts. On hit, the offensive die will deal stagger damage based on how many stacks of charge you have available to spend. For every 2 charge you spend, it will deal 6 stagger damage, up to a maximum of 6 charge spent. 18 stagger damage plus the roll is incredibly high for a single hit. making Martina especially suited to staggering opponents. Her unique passive reflects this, dealing 1 to 2 stagger on winning a clash. The last page for Kane Office is Nemo, the only gold page out of the bunch. Nemo's unique passive is Emergency Resuscitation Protocol, which will revive Nemo if he takes lethal damage. It spends all charge to do this and grants 5 health on revive for each charge spent. It will not negate over damage, unlike how Unrelenting and Persistence do, so it is unlikely to save you unless you aren't already staggered. Nemo's unique attack is called Energy Beam, which has only 1 offensive die to its name. 13 to 21 is very consistent for high damage, but you're actually meant to clash with it due to the effect. If you win the clash, you spend a measly 2 charge to completely destroy the next offensive die on the page you clashed with. Considering this attack is almost guaranteed to win any clash, it is very useful for defending yourself against a single powerful attack. In terms of updating your deck with Kane Office pages, I would recommend the following. Replace a copy of Leap for a copy of Energy Conversion for emergencies. Next, you can replace 1 or 2 copies of Energy Cycle for Energy Shield if you wish. Next, you have to make individual edits. Ready Up should replace Ripple on defensive and support setups, but not offensive setups. Lastly, replace the exclusive page of Warp with the one that corresponds to the page you're using. Take multiple copies if you can. Martina's deck works a little differently to the other two. You won't need any zero-cost charge gain or light restore here. Take 3 copies of Energy Shield, 1 copy of Leap, 2 copies of Absorb Impact, and 3 copies of Uncanny Strike. Keep your charge high and unleash Uncanny Strike as often as possible to cause as many staggers as you can. You don't even need to take advantage of her additional damage for winning clashes. Simply make her Pierce power as strong as possible and go nuts. Finally, we have the newest charge reception as of the writing of the script, R-Corp. Basically everything from the R-Corp receptions are direct upgrades to charge pages from past receptions, though there isn't a new version of Energy Shield. Beginning with charge gain, there are 5 new combat pages to take a look at, each with their own strengths. Graze the Grass is the second charge producing page to cost 0 light, and on top of giving 3 charge, it also gives 1 light without the need to hit. On top of this, the attack roll is guaranteed to give an emotion coin. While it may seem like a direct upgrade to Energy Cycle, I'd say it's actually preference whether or not you prefer this, since you deal much less damage in exchange for better defensive power. Bulky Impact is literally a direct upgrade to Absorb Impact in almost every way. The only difference is that it only gains 5 charge instead of 6. So you lose effectiveness in the 3 charge sweet spot gain, but the attack roll is significantly stronger, and you only lose a couple of defensive power in the process. Quick Suppression is the first charge page that inflicts bleed on the opponent, making it synergize very well on Hod's floor. Damage-wise, it is stronger than Will of the Prescript and costs 1 less light to use. It only gives 5 charge, so using it over Absorb Impact means you will likely to be building around it somewhat, though it is still quite powerful in regards to actual damage output. Concentration is a 3 light page that grants 8 charge, and the powerful defensive die at the front was recently nerfed. This makes Concentration fall under the not useful category. It produces less energy than a 0 cost and a 2 cost together, and the damage output is lower than Quick Suppression. There actually isn't much new in the energy spending department when it comes to these fights. On top of that, the new pages you do get are underwhelming for this point in the game. Energy Strike is the first of these, and has very solid damage output, matching Quick Suppression quite easily. The second offensive die will spend 3 charge to deal 8 stagger damage if available, which is a very solid effect in this case. The main drawback to this attack is the fact that it deals stagger damage to the user no matter what. Personally, I think it's worth it as long as you actually have charge when you use the attack. The key pages from R-Corp have different effects depending on what team the page is originally from. The generic passive of all of them is Triple R Suit, which increases your charge capacity from 10 to 20. The other generic passive for the teams is very tedious to say, but it gives a different buff when at 11 or more charge. The first team you encounter is the Reindeer. Each member of the Reindeer team deals an additional 2 stagger damage when above 10 charge, which plays into their gimmick very well. These grunts on their own can replace Martina simply by using Energy Strike. The Reindeer team also has an exclusive combat page, Mind Whip. Mind Whip is stronger than Pinpoint Shot, and the lone die has the same charge effect as the last die of Energy Strike. It is less useful because the reindeer need multiple offensive dice to be used effectively, but you can use it to deny an enemy who is near staggering before they can attack, since it's a ranged die. The second team you encounter is the Rhinos. If a member of the Rhino team has 11 or more charge, they will gain 2 protection at the start of the scene, making them better than Bada at tanking damage, but not better at defensive rolls. This can be alleviated simply by moving Bada's passive onto a Rhino team page. The Rhinos also have a signature attack, Rhino Ram. This is the only combat page that gains charge on hit rather than on use. For 4 light, you gain a near guarantee to get 8 charge, as well as a guarantee to gain 2 protection for the start of the scene. However, this page is very resource intensive to support, and using it as the primary means to gain charge means it's going to take a while to build up your supply. The Rabbit team is the last R-Corp that you'll encounter, and they gain 1 haste when above 10 charge. Unlike the other 2 teams, the Rabbits do not have their own signature attack. Just generally, these are the weakest of the key pages for the regular grunts of R-Corp, and I suggest moving the passive rather than using the page as a page. Moving on from the grunts of R-Corp, we also have the 4 commanders, each with their own charge-related abilities. Rudolph is captain of the reindeer and shares their passive, but does not have a new passive involving charge. Instead, he has a unique mass attack called Mind Crush. Mind Crush doesn't consume charge, but you need to have at least 20 charge in order to use it. Every hit of the mass attack deals an additional 8 stagger damage once you factor in the native passive of the reindeer team. This is easily the most powerful of the exclusive attacks, though the others all come very close. The second captain is Maxim, who shares attributes with the Rhino team. He does have a unique passive this time, Maximum Crash. This passive increases all damage dealt by 50% if the character began the scene with 20 or more charge. This ability is actually bugged. It doesn't increase the damage dealt by 50% like it says at the moment of recording. It actually increases it by around 200%. This is easily one of the most powerful passives in the game, and it plays into his exclusive attack, Ground Smash. This is a summation mass attack that consumes 20 charge in order to boost its power by 10. Since the attack can't be used unless you have 20 charge anyways, it means you are spending all your charge and a good amount of your light to roll a single very powerful die against the entire enemy team. Factor in the plus 50% damage from Maximum Crash, or plus 200% pre-patch of the bug, and you have a good method to wipe out the enemy team. The only reason I believe Mind Crush is better is because consuming the charge you've been building up takes away your passives for a scene or 2. Mio is the captain of the Rabbit team, and doesn't have a passive related to charge other than the Rabbit team's signature passive. However, she does have a different method in her attacks anyways. Her exclusive attack is Savage Mode, which turns all ranged pages into melee pages and gives her a permanent +1 power to all dice. The catch is that you can only play it at emotion level 3 or higher. Using this page also adds a copy of Feral Knives to your hand. Feral Knives can only be used at 20 charge and is an individual mass attack like Mind Crush. However, it leans more heavily on damage rather than stagger damage. Each successful hit inflicts 3 bleed, and the final hit deals an additional 15 damage to the manually selected target. This is the hardest exclusive attack to build to because of the requirement to use Savage Mode first, but it has the highest total damage of all of them. The last captain doesn't have a tie to any of the other teams. Nikolai is further unique from the rest because she has her own signature passive called the Commander. The Commander grants 1 strength and endurance to all allies if Nikolai has 11 or more charge. This is like combining the generic passives of Kane Office together and making them easier to activate, but for the entire team. Nikolai's exclusive attack is Disposal, which can only be used at 20 charge or higher. This is an insanely powerful single target attack that exhausts if it doesn't kill the enemy, though at minimum it deals 52 damage to a target that doesn't resist it, so it's not hard to kill using it. Each time you successfully kill with the attack, it also becomes easier to use as the cost is reduced by 1 light. These are all the resources you have in relation to charge, so now let's go over some more specialized strategies involving it. Grab Bada's page and attribute the passives Your Shield and Liquefied Flesh. The last passive is up to you, though I recommend something to increase your defensive output even further. Grab 3 copies of Energy Shield, 1 copy of Gig, 2 copies of Iron Wall, 1 copy of Sturdy Defense, and 2 copies of Devastating Thrash. Energy Shield is the most obvious defensive option, and is the source of your charge gain in this setup. Gig is used for light regen and has defensive power. Iron Wall and Sturdy Defense are both used to counter the enemy's most powerful attacks and gain endurance for the future. Devastating Thrash is your main method of dealing damage. This setup is most effective on Hod's floor due to the Abno page's shyness and social distancing, which increase your defensive and block power even further. It's actually possible to combine Smoke and Charge together, but only in a defensive setup from what I've experienced. Your attributed passives should be Liquefied Flesh, Puffy Broom, and Internal Combustion Engine on Bada's page. Grab 2 copies of Energy Shield, 2 copies of Hidden Blade, 2 copies of Defense Order, 2 copies of Ready Up, and 1 copy of Devastating Thrash. This setup does the near impossible task of combining Charge and Smoke, and does so decently well at least. Energy Shield and Defense Order are your methods of gaining Charge and Smoke. Ready Up is used to be able to spend Charge for Bada's passives, and Hidden Blade for Devastating Thrash and are your main offensive options. This setup works best on Hod's floor for the same reason as the previous build, but also works well on Hawkmo's floor due to Lean Bloody Wings and Alert and Focus. It also works well on Roland's floor thanks to Blood. If you're looking for a much more speed-oriented build, I recommend grabbing Rose's page and then attributing the passives Acceleration, Rabbit Augmentation, and Reindeer Treatment. Prior to our corp, I would use Talent and Unstable Charge instead of Rabbit Augmentation and Reindeer Treatment. Grab 2 copies of Energy Cycle, 1 copy of Leap, 2 copies of Flying Sword, 1 copy of Rip Space, 2 copies of Bulky Impact or Absorb Impact, depending on where you are in the game, and 1 copy of either Concentration or Ripple, depending on how you want to play. The goal here is to keep Rose's speed above 4 at all costs. Rabbit Augmentation and Reindeer Treatment will accelerate your damage dealing potential to great lengths, and you can even use Rip Space to prematurely to give yourself stat boosts if you want. Ultimately, Rip Space is your most powerful attack, while the combination of Energy Cycle, Bulky Impact, and Concentration are used for maximizing charge gain. Flying Sword consistently keeps your speed above 4 as well. This setup works best on Hod's floor for Alertness, Hawkmo's floor for Gaze of Others, Roland's floor for Aspiration, and Malkuth's floor for Display of Affection, all to increase your speed or offensive potential overall. Maxim's page is a little overpowered as it is, but you can still focus on making it tanky if you want to just go in and not die. Take his page and attribute Force Field and Brainwave Charge Focusing Antlers. Grab 2 copies of Graze the Grass, 1 copy of Gigi, 1 copy of Leap, 1 copy of Bulky Impact, 1 copy of Concentration, 2 copies of Rhino Ram, and 1 copy of Ground Slam. Graze the Grass, Gigi, Bulky Impact, Concentration, and Rhino Ram are all used to keep the power of momentum on your side, as well as keeping yourself alive thanks to their defensive dice power. Having a copy of Leap is useful for keeping your hand full, and Rhino Ram keeps your protection at maximum as well. Ground Slam is simply to nuke the enemy team. This build works on every floor, mostly because Maxim's passive is still broken at the time of recording this. If you're looking for an easy way to stagger every enemy on the floor, grab Rudolph's page and attribute the passives Energy Discharge and Fervor. Grab 2 copies of Energy Cycle, 1 copy of Leap, 2 copies of Energy Strike, 1 copy of Bulky Impact, 1 copy of Concentration, 1 copy of Mind Whip, and 1 copy of Mind Crush. This build is designed to maximize the output of stagger damage from this page. Keep in mind those pages haven't been out a long time, so this build may not be perfectly optimized yet, but Energy Strike is the most powerful stagger damage attack available currently, and Mind Crush is just an insanely powerful attack. Plus, you can use the aforementioned Mind Whip to stop enemies from attacking if they're low on stagger resist if you need to. Nikolai's page is very easy to build around, since you don't actually need to worry about spending charge at all while using her page. Take her page and attribute the passives Brainwave Charge Focusing Antlers, Bionic Charge Synchronized Hull, and Compressed Charge Stimulated Muscle Force. Grab 2 copies of Graze the Grass, 2 copies of Quick Suppression, 1 copy of Les Regolais, 1 copy of Leap, 2 copies of Battle Command, and 1 copy of Disposal. There's very little charge consumption in this build because the entire point is to keep your charge above 10 for the entire fight. This will increase both your offensive and defensive capabilities as well as those of your allies. Battle Command and Les Regolais are to increase the damage output of your team significantly. While everything appears expensive, it's mainly just because you're meant to keep your hand from running out. Leap is only there to keep your hand from emptying as well. Mio has the fastest key page currently in the game. Unfortunately, it only has 1 passive attribution slot. On any floor other than Hod's, I would recommend taking Acceleration to increase your stagger damage dealt. But on Hod's floor, I would recommend taking Digging Shank instead in order to increase the amount of bleed damage you deal. Take 1 copy of Unlock 1, 2 copies of Graze the Grass, 2 copies of Concentrated Fire, 3 copies of Quick Suppression, and 1 copy of Savage Mode. The build is designed to go fast. Like, really fast. Seriously, you can't go any faster. Want more fast? Go to Roland's floor for Aspiration or Hod's floor for Alertness. Then you go fast. Super fast. Yeah. You should of course experiment with different ways to make these builds. They aren't perfect. But I hope that you have at least a better grasp of how to utilize charge in Library of Ruina. Have fun building decks and keep charging straight to victory.